There's a world under our world. It's where monsters come from and where they're supposed to stay. I think something just got out, and it's following me. It happened at the subway. It was 8:30 a.m. on a Friday. I was stuck in my usual morning commute. My eyes were glued to my phone as I waited for the train. I wasn't really paying attention to my surroundings. I was more interested in the emails from work. After I replied to a few, I glanced up to check the timetable. My train would be arriving in less than 5 minutes. Then, movement on the tracks caught my eye. The platform was a little crowded, but I was pretty much at the front of the line. I had a clear view of the train tracks, and I could see someone down there. They looked like they were pacing. They were walking slowly up and down the line. I stepped forward to get a better look. I couldn't really make out their features from here. They wore a shapeless gray jacket with a huge hood pulled over their face. Their ratty pants were dirty white and full of holes. I could see they were barefoot too. Probably a homeless person then. I felt bad. Poor guy definitely looked lost. "Hey, you okay?" I called to him. The guy didn't even look up. He did slow down though. His movements were still jerky and awkward. I raised my voice a bit. Maybe he hadn't heard me. "Hey man, train's coming pretty soon. You should probably get out of there." I saw a few people near me move forward and look down the tracks as well, probably to see who I was talking to. Good, they could help me coax him out. Still no response from the guy. A tinny canned announcement blared from the speakers overhead. It said the next train is bound for Brookside Station. Please stay behind the yellow line. That meant he had 3 minutes and 30 seconds to get out of there. Worried, I stepped to the edge of the platform and squatted down to get closer to him. "Hey, train's almost here, man," I said. This time he stopped walking. I sighed in relief, and I stretched out my arm towards him. "Come on, grab my hand. I'll give you a boost, all right?" I told him. But he didn't move. I frowned and tried to get closer, leaning further past the platform. I could hear the people around me reacting, but the guy didn't even turn around. Maybe he was drunk? I quickly checked my watch. I glanced down the subway just to confirm that the train wasn't here yet. And then I jumped down from the platform and landed on the tracks. I heard some screams from the crowd, but I just ran over to the homeless guy and grabbed his arm. "Work with me, man," I said. I shook his arm a bit, hoping that would snap him out of whatever daze he was in. "Train's gonna be here in less than 3 minutes, okay? We gotta go," I told him. When he still didn't move, I started pulling him towards the platform. Thankfully, he wasn't fighting my hold. But man, he was pretty heavy for a skinny homeless guy. Definitely not the 90-pound lightweight I was expecting. Still, I could handle him. The crowd seemed to be full-on panicking now. We were definitely moving a lot slower than I would have liked, but I felt we could make it. I could probably get him out with a fireman's carry once we were close enough to the platform. Almost there. Suddenly, though, the guy dug his heels in. We came to an abrupt stop. "Hey," I said. I yanked him a little harder. "This is no time to stop, dude." The guy was heavier and stronger than he looked. I leveraged my own weight to lift him up, but he was not budging. I grunted and went to walk around him, hoping I'd have more success pushing instead of pulling. Before I could move, though, he turned to look at me. I almost expected an apology. What I didn't expect was a wide smile showing jagged yellow teeth, pale cracked lips stretched on pasty, plastic-like skin. Long strands of stringy black hair framed the face, looking at me from beneath the hood. The features I could see almost looked feminine. They stared at me with one red, bloodshot eye, I jerked back a little, shocked. The girl's grin seemed too large for her face. It looked unnatural. The one eye I could see was large and unblinking. Why the hell was she grinning? We had about a minute left before the train arrived, probably less even. I heard someone yell from the platform, telling me to hurry up and get out of there. "I'm trying," I muttered under my breath. I grabbed the girl again and tried to pick her up. Come on, come on. A loud electric ping sounded overhead, signaling another announcement. The announcement said, "Now arriving. Train to Brookside Station. This train to Brookside Station. Mind the gap." We were out of time. I bent down and prepared to lift her up. That was the only way I could get us both on the platform. And then suddenly, I felt hands clamp on my shoulders. Next thing I knew, I was back on the platform. I glanced around, a little disoriented. Dozens of people were staring at me, their faces all varying with levels of alarm and concern. Two big guys stood next to me, probably the ones who pulled me out. But I didn't see the homeless girl. "What the hell were you doing?" one of the guys demanded. I whipped around to look at the tracks. She was still there, grinning up at me. "There's still someone down there," I said. "We have to..." The train rushed past me, cutting me off with a loud screech. I was too late. There was a kid down there. "We gotta call 911. Someone was on the tracks," I said. "Yeah, you were," the other guy began. "You were on the tracks. We got you out." "Not me," I shot back. "The homeless girl, the one with the gray jacket. Why the hell did you leave her?" Over the line, I heard a click. 911, what's your emergency? "Yes, we need help," I began. "I'm at Redstone Station. Somebody was on the tracks. We couldn't get him out before the train arrived, and I don't think she made it." The operator started asking me questions to get more details. I answered as best I could. The noise around me was almost deafening as word began to spread of the girl. 2 hours later, I was standing on the same station platform, looking in disbelief at the cop in front of me. He sighed and repeated what I knew couldn't possibly be the truth. "Well, search and rescue combed these tracks from top to bottom, sir," the officer told me. He was young, maybe my age, and he had a stupid-looking goatee that did nothing to hide his baby face. There were other cops walking around, talking to other passengers and taking statements. Some cops were shining their flashlights down on the tracks, the apparently empty subway tracks. "Yeah, no sign of a body, alive, injured, or otherwise," he continued. I opened my mouth to clarify, but he kept talking. "Our team just finished reviewing the footage. We're gonna go through them again just to be sure. But you were the only one on those train tracks in the last 24 hours. "That's impossible," I interrupted. "There was a homeless kid. I saw him. Why the hell do you think I jumped on the tracks?" Goatee looked at me for a moment, and then spoke again. This isn't a harmless prank, sir. You initiated an emergency train stop and phoned in false information to 911. These are very punishable offenses, and I need you to come with us." "Wait, what? Why would I joke about this?" "Someone needed help," I said. Yeah. Well, we have multiple witnesses claiming you jumped from the platform unprompted," Goatee continued. "Then proceeded to ignore instructions to get out. Also have the recording of your 911 call informing the responder that someone was on the tracks when the train arrived." "Yeah, no shit, because there was someone on the tracks," I said. I tried to get him out, but two guys pulled me up before I could, and that's why I placed the call, idiot. Goatee held up a hand.
Whoa! Sir, we're gonna have to ask you to come with us.
Look, check again, I began. I know what I saw, all right. She wore a gray jacket and...
Sir,
the officer interrupted.
I'm only gonna ask this one more time. Please come with us.
I wanted to fight back. The fact that they thought I would joke about something like this made me sick. But the look on Goatee's face told me it wasn't worth arguing. So I just nodded and followed him to one of the cruisers parked outside the station. Luckily, they didn't slap cuffs on me. The drive to the station was uneventful. The actual interrogation was long, repetitive, and lasted almost 2 hours. I lost track of time as I repeated this morning's event to every officer who came in to question me over and over again. Now, I've watched enough movies to know that the mirror next to me was a one-way window. I knew that there were people on the other side trying to decide if I was a liar, troublemaker, or just batshit crazy. I scowled at the mirror. Someone had been down there. The cops just hadn't looked hard enough. There were service tunnels that led to the tracks, right? For, repairs and stuff. Maybe the girl had managed to crawl into one of them in time. Search and rescue just needed to find her. And then my story would make sense. They'd know I wasn't messing around or playing a prank. The door to the interrogation room opened again. In walked the same officer who brought me in. Same stupid goatee and that same stupid face. I didn't bother hiding my glare. Call me petty, but I did not like that guy. He told me that they couldn't detain me for more than 24 hours while the investigation was ongoing, since I'd already given my statement and had shown willingness to cooperate. They were gonna let me go. Well, that was a relief. But the investigation is still ongoing, Goatee began. Right now, all evidence points towards willful tampering of emergency systems. If we gather enough for a case, you'll have to file an appeal. Maybe even go to court. Did you just say go to court? I asked. Are you serious? You initiated a full-scale emergency at the station for no reason, he reminded me. There was someone on the tracks, I shot back.
Well, search and rescue still hasn't found a body, he replied.
Then they're obviously not looking hard enough, I said. Goatee gave me a sharp look at that.
Okay, look. The only reason you aren't in an overnight cell right now is good behavior, he began. I suggest you don't jeopardize that, sir.
Yeah, whatever, dude, I said, standing up. We done? I can go now. He nodded.
Yeah, we called your emergency contact. Miss Natalie Wakefield is waiting for you in the lobby.
By the time Natalie and I got back to my apartment, it was dark out. Natalie, my girlfriend, has always been the babbling type. She babbled when she was excited, when she was nervous, and when she was overwhelmed. So I was genuinely surprised that she managed to stay quiet the entire ride home. But the moment we stepped through the door, she started firing off questions. Natalie had apparently been at work when she'd gotten the call. All they told her was that I'd been brought in for questioning. Then, when she got to the station, no one gave her the details of my case. So I knew why she was asking so many questions. Heck, if I was in her place, I'd be demanding answers too. But I was exhausted. I wanted to crawl into bed and just forget all this. Hey, I said, cutting her off with a gentle squeeze of her arm. She immediately shut up. Look, I really appreciate you picking me up, Nat. I continued. Really? But it's been a long day. Can we just talk about this tomorrow, please?
Right. She said quickly. Of course. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. Of course you'd be tired. You want me to make you some tea to help you sleep? I was pretty sure I could collapse right there and then. No tea required. Still, she meant well. I nodded and managed to smile. Sure. Thanks. Just bring it to the room when it's ready, okay? I'm gonna go to bed. She nodded and went to the kitchen. And that's when something caught my attention. The bathroom door, right between the kitchen and the bedroom, was slightly open. And there, in the space between the door and the frame, I saw someone, something, standing in the darkness. I instinctively grabbed Natalie and pushed her behind me to protect her. Get back, I whispered. I looked more closely at the figure. Was that? It was the girl from the subway. She stared back at me with that one wide, bloodshot eye. Her skin was the same bluish gray I'd seen earlier. Unnaturally smooth, like plastic. Great. I'd tried to help a crazy person. Well, at least she wasn't dead. I gently but firmly pushed Natalie towards the direction of the bedroom, making sure she was behind me. Nat, I said, go to the bedroom and lock the door. Call 911 and let them know somebody broke in. In the corner of my eye, I saw a hardbound book I'd been reading. I quickly picked it up. It wasn't much of a weapon, but whatever. Broke in? Natalie repeated. She tried to push past me. I quickly moved to cover her again. I glared at the girl in the gap, daring her to move. The corner of her thin lips jerked upwards in response, like she was about to smile. Just get to the bedroom and lock the door, I repeated. I'll handle this. Jason, seriously, cut it out, Natalie said. Why was she being so difficult? Anyway, I couldn't lose risking track of the girl, so I moved forward. I was ready to tackle her. I did remember that she was much stronger than she looked, though. I had at least a foot of height over her, though. I could grab her, then hold her until Natalie called the cops. What are you doing? Natalie said. There's no one there. I shook her off and moved forward. Natalie made a furious, confused noise and darted around me. She sprinted towards the bathroom. I tried to grab her. The crazy in the bathroom didn't seem interested in her, thank God, because she was still staring straight at me. But I didn't know what she was capable of, and I didn't want Natalie to risk provoking her. Before I could grab Natalie, she reached the bathroom door and shoved it open, strong enough that it hit the wall with a bang. Then she shot her arm into the darkness and hit the light switch. Warm orange light flooded out. The girl was nowhere to be seen. I was shocked. The bathroom was totally empty. Jason, Natalie began. You see this, right? You see that there's no one here, right? I couldn't argue. I couldn't even reason this out. Our bathroom's small, barely enough for 2 people, and it doesn't have a window. The only possible exit is the air vent, and that's only about 1.5 feet wide. No way in hell was an adult human being squeezing through that thing. I started to say something, and then stopped. Confused didn't even begin to cover what I felt. Natalie was starting to look less pissed and more concerned. I shook my head, hoping to clear it. I'm sorry, I mumbled, taking her hand. I'm sorry, I thought I could have sworn
It looks so real. She squeezed my hand comfortingly. It's okay, she said softly. I'm sorry for freaking out too. You've had a stressful day. Yeah, I laughed dryly. That's one way to put it. And you're too tired to talk about this right now, she continued. Let's just get some sleep, okay? Before we both start seeing things. She gestured again at the very empty bathroom. I stared at it for a few more seconds, a little hurt by the dig, but not enough to start something. Not after the day I'd had. I was tired. We both were, and look, she was right. I sighed and shut the bathroom door. Nat was right. There was nothing there. I wish it stayed that way. Because the next time I saw her, she was looking at me from between our closet doors. This was Saturday, the day after the shit show at the train station. I'd managed a solid 10 hours of sleep. Nat had cooked up a huge breakfast for me. I was fed, well rested, and in the familiar comfort of my own home, so I couldn't pretend I was tired and seeing things. She was right there. Natalie had been rooting through that very closet only a few minutes earlier, looking for a coat. She was running late for lunch with her friends, so when she found what she was looking for, she didn't bother to close the doors properly, just swung them shut as best she could, and dashed out with a "See you later, Jason," thrown over her shoulder. I followed her out, locked the door behind her, and headed back to the bedroom. And then I stopped short in the doorway, and I stared in disbelief at the girl in the closet. There was no mistaking it. She was the one I'd tried to save at the subway, and she'd broken into our home last night. Through the sliver of space between the closet doors, I could make out the same plastic skin, the same dark hair, the same bloodshot eye. What the hell? I said. The girl in the closet kept watching me. How the hell did you get in here? I demanded, hoping a little anger would scare her. What do you want? She said nothing. I thought about the gun in my bedside drawer, something I kept just in case. But if she saw me getting a weapon, she might attack. I didn't want to just shoot her. She was clearly not right in the head. I couldn't even begin to imagine what sort of drug she was on. But I didn't know what the hell she was going to do either. And then I remembered Natalie's baseball bat. My eyes darted to the corner of our bedroom, and sure enough, the bat was there, propped up against a few boxes. Again, look, I didn't want to hurt this girl, but I did want to scare her. I wanted her to get out and not come back. When we'd first moved in together, I had insisted Natalie have some sort of weapon just in case of a break-in or robbery. She hated guns, so as a compromise, I bought her a steel bat. I dove for it. Adrenaline had me moving faster than I thought possible. Less than a second later, I was raising it threateningly over my head as I glared at her. Okay, enough. Get out, I told her. Nothing. She didn't move, didn't reply, didn't even twitch in surprise. She just continued staring at me. And then after a few seconds of silence, she grinned. And that was it for me. I moved across the room, pulled the closet doors open, and I went to grab her and pull her out. But she was gone. I can't tell you exactly how she disappeared. I don't think I'll ever have the words to describe it. She didn't pop out of existence like a bubble. She didn't fade away either. It was like something being erased. It was like she was there, and then she simply wasn't. I spent another minute searching the closet, pushing aside coats and jackets and dresses for any hint that something had been there. When it became painfully obvious that I wasn't going to find anything, I shut the doors and left the apartment. I didn't see the girl again until Monday. At work, I don't know how she followed me. I was in the lobby of our building, waiting for the elevator to my office on the 18th floor. I was in a pretty deep discussion with my colleague about our latest hires, so I didn't notice the elevator had arrived until I heard a ding. We paused our conversation to watch the door slide open so we could gauge how full the lift was. The now familiar sheen of blue-gray skin and yellow, jagged teeth brought me up short. There, in the middle of the elevator, was the girl from the station, and she was looking right at me. And then a split second later, she was gone, just like in the closet. She was there, and then she simply wasn't. The elevator door slid open fully to reveal 4 guys in suits. As I stared at them, they looked back at me in obvious confusion. My coworker asked if I was okay, and I couldn't reply. I decided to take the stairs. On Tuesday, I got called back to the police station. When I got there, Goatee, of all people, put me back in the interrogation room.
You know, your little stunt held up the rest of the trains for at least an hour, he told me. Threw a lot of people's schedules off. You know, they want someone to blame. And since no one comes forward to back up your little story, we're ready to post search and rescue off this case. Confirmed false alarm. You, buddy, are looking at a very hefty fine. Or a state hearing. You know what? Possibly both.
I looked back at him in shock. I thought someone needed help, I began. Was I supposed to sit back and let the train run someone over? That's how things work for you?
And my God, dude, would you relax about the damn train schedule? Trains get held up all the time. All right, welcome to the real world, pal.
Goatee looked back at me.
Well, there's a huge difference between wanting to help and actually helping, he began. You don't get plus points for trying in the real world.
He did air quotes when he said real world. Actual, honest-to-God air quotes. He looked ridiculous. He was also a huge prick. I wanted to say so, but I held my tongue. He was still the officer handling my case, and I couldn't antagonize him too much.
And it's not just about stopping the train, he insisted. Like we told you, he can't just go around making prank calls to 911, buddy. That is tampering with public emergency systems.
Okay, so why am I here? I asked. Since you think I made it all up, right?
Our guys are reviewing the security footage again, he began. And we need to know where to look. Believe it or not, we do want to be thorough. If there's someone down on the tracks, we want to find them.
So he asked for my story again. I think he was looking for inconsistencies. That's what they do, right? When cops think you're lying, they make you tell your story a dozen times until you mention something new or you describe something differently. And then they got you. But I knew I wasn't lying. So I told Goatee the same story I told him and the other officers last week. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't look skeptical either. Maybe I was imagining it, but he almost looked concerned. I couldn't be sure, though, because his goatee was in the way. He stood up.
All right, I need to grab other witness statements, he began. Stay here, and I'll be back in a few minutes, all right?
He walked out of the interrogation room, leaving me to my thoughts. I rubbed my eyes. I was so tired, and it was only Tuesday. I was still reeling from what I'd seen the past few days. I didn't know what to make of it, and I didn't know where to begin. Then I raised my head and froze. She was there. Goatee hadn't closed the door the whole way. I could see her standing just outside it, staring at me through the crack. I jumped to my feet, full fight or flight. Her eyes darted up, tracking me, but she didn't move, didn't even twitch. Just continued tracking me with her eye as I slowly moved around the table. I wanted to look around for anything I could use as a weapon, but I also didn't want to take my eyes off her. Would she disappear again? Would she stay? Would Goatee come back in time to see me attacking her? Suddenly, the door swung open, and just like that, she was gone again. An older cop stepped through the door. He had deep frown lines, even deeper laugh lines, and a full head of salt and pepper hair. His eyes were a clear, startling blue.
Hey there,
he said. His voice was gruff, but not unkind.
Interrogation's not over, I'm afraid. I'm gonna need you to sit back down.
Right, I replied. Only I couldn't. I felt like I'd be vulnerable if I did. The girl was probably still here. The old cop raised an eyebrow.
Something wrong with the chair, son?
I shook my head and forced myself to sit back down, even though my instincts all but screamed that I couldn't relax here. Where's the other guy? I asked.
Oh, you mean Summers?
The old cop said, taking the seat across from me.
I got pulled over by forensics. He'll be back, though.
Summers? His name is Summers? I asked, still trying to calm myself down.
Yeah, it's on his badge,
he replied. Doesn't suit him, I muttered back. The old cop grinned, his eyes shining with amusement.
Yeah, that is true, isn't it? What, you got a better name for him?
In my head, I was actually calling him Goatee, I said. The old cop barked a laugh. It was short but deep, like he genuinely found it funny. I felt a lot better with that laugh.
Goatee, huh? You know, I like that. I just might start using that. See if I can get it to stick.
You handling my case too? I asked. I figured he was. Why else would he be talking to me?
Me? Nah. Not in my jurisdiction. I'm just a traffic cop, he replied.
Oh, I said. A bit disappointed. Looked like it was just me and Goatee.
The door was open, and I saw you moving around inside. Figured you were feeling antsy, cooped up in here all alone. I thought I'd keep you some company,
he said. Before I could ask more questions, the door swung open again. Goatee stepped inside, clutching a fairly thick folder in one hand. In the other, he held a small styrofoam cup of what looked like fresh coffee. If he was surprised by the old cop's appearance, he did not show it. He simply slapped the folder onto the table and took a sip of his drink. The old cop stood up.
And that's my cue, he said.
He turned to leave, nodding once in my direction.
You ever need help with a parking ticket, son, you come find me, okay?
Thanks.
And don't worry about this upstart, he continued,
clapping Goatee on the shoulder. Goatee jumped, almost spilling his coffee.
He's all bark, no bite. You know how it is.
Goatee glared back at him.
You want to go, old man?
He asked. The other cop just chuckled.
Whoa, easy there, little fella.
He opened the door and stepped out. Goatee muttered something under his breath, and seeing him annoyed was gratifying. I bit back a grin.
I hate that guy, he muttered.
It wasn't until I got home that night that I felt like there'd been something strange about that old cop. On Wednesday, I walked in on Nat moving furniture around in the living room. She bought a walking pad 2 weeks ago. It had just arrived that morning, and she was trying to find a good spot. I quickly changed out of my suit and put on some ratty house clothes so I could help her. But when I walked back into the living room, I saw that girl again, and she was grinning at me. Long strands of stringy hair framed what I could see of her face. Natalie had pushed the couch away from its original corner in an attempt to make room for the pad. And the girl was somehow wedged in the small space between the wall and the couch, looking up at me with a smile. This was impossible. Natalie flitting around, laughing as she tugged the coffee table this way and that, told me everything I needed to know. She couldn't see this girl. Only I could. I shoved the couch back until it hit the wall. The space and the thing crouching in it just disappeared. The next day, I was a wreck. Natalie definitely noticed. She cooked me an extra big breakfast and admitted that she was concerned. Apparently, I was distant, jumpy. Considering that I was typically a very chill, even-tempered guy, I could see why this worried her. I lied, and I told her I was just worried about the ongoing investigation. It was partly true anyway. She knew about what happened at the train station already. I told her the full story the day after, and she was just as confused as I was. She bought it, assured me that search and rescue would find something, or that someone would come forward and back up my story. I smiled, hoping it came off as genuine, and I thanked her. She told me to go hang out with my friends, do something to take my mind off the case, and I took her advice. I went out with my coworkers that night. One of them said they knew a great bar. I didn't care if they served nothing but cold pizza and shitty beer. I was desperate for something normal, something to distract me from the very real possibility that I was losing my mind. I walked up to the bar to get the first round of drinks started, but had to stop halfway because I saw her lying there, squeezed beneath the counter. She looked up at me with a wide eye and an even wider grin. I turned and walked right out of the bar. I made it about a block before I broke into a run. I was trying to stay calm and sensible, but what the hell was I supposed to do? I didn't know what this was and why I was the only one who could see it. I don't know why this thing wouldn't just leave me alone. I just knew I couldn't live my life like this. Tense, paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder for that thing. I needed to do something, to try and fix this. But I didn't know how. It was Friday again. I was heading to work, still on edge. A train rolled into the station. The overhead speakers came to life, confirming this was my train. I fell in line with the other commuters, waiting for passengers to get off so we could get on. Now boarding, the tinny robotic recording said cheerfully, "Passengers bound for Brookside Station, this train to Brookside Station." I looked down as I boarded the train, careful not to trip. But she was there too, grinning up at me from the space between the platform and the train, her wide eyes red and strained. I could see the edges of yellow, jagged teeth poking out from thin, cracked lips. The announcement ended with the usual warning. "Mind the gap," it said. I stared down at her as everything fell into place. Gaps. Is that how she was following me? The people behind me pushed onto the train.
I made my way to an empty spot, my eyes never leaving the gap.
And the girl in it, looking right at me. Her grin grew wider, almost like she knew that I'd finally figured it out. I spent the rest of the day an absolute mess. Search and rescue wouldn't find a body on the tracks because they were right. There wasn't a person down there. Just a thing with bloodshot eyes, plastic skin, and yellow, jagged teeth. I ran the possibilities over in my mind. Why was I the only one who could see her? Even the first time on the tracks, no one else had seen her but me. Did she just choose to appear to me? Was I just unlucky? Or had I messed around with something I wasn't supposed to? To make matters worse, I was called back to the police station the next day, probably for Goatee to yell at me more for delaying the trains. Looks like I was paying that fine after all, because my case was a lost cause. She was obviously something unnatural. No one else could see her. I really had initiated an emergency train stop for no reason. All because I'd been trying to help some sick, twisted creature that didn't need it. God, that's probably why she keeps grinning at me, laughing at the absolute mess my life has become because of her. And I didn't know how to get rid of her. When I arrived, Goatee escorted me to a different room this time. It had more furniture than the other one, but was still very bare bones. Just a desk, 3 chairs, an old fan, and an old filing cabinet. Wow, an upgrade, I muttered sarcastically. I couldn't help it. You know, I do miss the old mirror, though. Goatee shot me an annoyed look. All right, take a seat, he told me. CJ will be here shortly. CJ? I repeated, sitting down. The hell's a CJ? Goatee pushed a manila envelope over to me, still annoyed. CJ's the reason all charges against you were dropped, he shot back. So I'd watched the attitude. I frowned, confused. You're officially cleared of all charges, Goatee clarified. No fine, no court hearing, not even a mark on your public record. Congratulations. I sat there and looked at him. What? Goatee smirked. Well, you've dealt with a freaking demon peering at you from tiny spaces the whole week, he said. And this is what breaks you? I didn't want to sound like a broken record, so I kept my mouth shut. But I sure as shit kept staring at him. Because, what? What did he say? The door to the office swung open, and the old traffic cop from last week stepped in. Santos from Search and Rescue called in that favor we owe him, he said in lieu of a greeting. Goatee groaned. What, already? He complained. It's been 2 weeks. Yeah, well, hallway dweller in the old hotel on 6th, the old cop replied with a shrug. Come on, you know how it is. Goatee sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. My God, that place needs to be condemned, he said. The old traffic cop turned to me and gave me a cheerful grin. You're looking mighty confused, son. He patted my shoulder and took the other chair. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just looked at him. He nodded at the envelope in front of me. Now that there is the official report for your case, he began. Now you can read it if you want to, but I'll help you cut through all the legal crap. Now basically, the emergency train stop called last week, Friday, was ruled as mass hysteria. There weren't enough witness statements to accurately detail the events that occurred. I was hearing what he was saying, but the words weren't fully sinking in. Not enough witnesses. The train had been full of people. And the witness statements that were documented were so full of inconsistencies and inaccuracies, the investigators agreed that none of them could be used objectively. He continued. CCTV footage shows nothing out of the ordinary either.
Right, I croaked out, because I felt like I had to say something. The old cop winked at me.
So, nobody hurt, no bodies found, and no substantial evidence. The higher-ups have written it off as mass hysteria and don't think it's prudent to pin the blame on one person.
Yeah, like I said.
Goatee cut in, sounding bored.
Officially cleared.
This was the first piece of good news I'd gotten in weeks. I should have punched the air in victory. I should have yelled, "I told you so," in Goatee's face. Heck, I should have taken the old-timer's hand and shook it vigorously. And I would have, had Goatee's earlier statement not been replaying in my head in an annoying, persistent loop. You said demon, I croaked out, turning to look at Goatee. Before the older cop came in, you said peering at you from tiny spaces. The old cop groaned. Really, Summers? Goatee snickered.
Yeah, I couldn't help it. You should have seen him gaping like a goldfish.
The old cop smacked the back of his head. I am sorry about him, he sighed, and he sounded genuinely apologetic. He forgets how to be human sometimes, he continued. I don't know what my expression was in that moment, but it made the old-timer pause. He reached over the table and clapped a hand on my shoulder again, gentle but firm, grounding. All right, well, I'm going to explain everything as best as I can now, son. You think you can take it? Or you want to take a break first? A break? I thought. I wanted nothing more. But I needed to know. I needed everything to start making sense. So I shook my head. Yeah, no, just lay it on me, I managed to say. Don't know where I got the bravado, but I think I sounded convincing enough. The old cop looked pleased, at least. Alrighty then. First things first, the name's CJ, son. He held out his hand for me to shake. It's very nice to meet you. You got the charges against me dropped, I said. Goatee here said so earlier. I looked over at him. I don't think he liked his new nickname. But CJ cut him off before he could say anything. Yeah, it was easy, he said with a little wink. Especially since no one was hurt. The department was ready to close the case on day one, actually. Slap you with a fine for messing with emergency systems and be done with it. But I didn't think it was right to make you pay for anything. I mean, you were innocent. Besides, we needed more time. We had to keep the case open until we knew what we were dealing with. We? I repeated. CJ chuckled. Sure. The shit we face, son? It's not the kind of shit you can face alone. What shit? I wanted to ask. But the old cop held up a hand to stop me. That's a story for another time, he said. Let's focus on the witch in the wardrobe first, huh? For the first time in what felt like decades, I managed to crack a small smile. Not just in the wardrobe, I replied. Well, that is correct. Everywhere there's a gap, in fact. We don't have the conditions down to an exact science, but we do know a few, CJ confirmed. He held up his hand and started ticking off his fingers. We know lighting doesn't matter to her, neither does the time of day. She's not bothered by the sun, and she sure as shit doesn't need to wait till night. I remember the elevator at work, our living room, heck, this very police station. Bloodshot eyes staring at me from impossibly small spaces at random times of the day, and that mocking yellow grin. CJ continued. We've seen her pop up in gaps as thin as my finger, but any space wider than a hand span doesn't count. I guess the little lady's shy, huh?
Wait, so you don't need to close the gap for her to disappear, I realized. You just have to make it not a gap.
Yep, CJ began. Swing a door wider, pull curtains further apart, or slam them shut. Whatever you gotta do to get rid of her. For a dweller of her status, she is actually pretty limited.
Dweller, I repeated. I was so out of my depth.
What we call the creatures like her, CJ continued. Because they dwell in the... Yeah, never mind. He waved his hand, like he was waving the conversation away. Another story for another time.
You ever see her full face? I blurted out. Look, at this point I knew, all right? I knew they knew. We were discussing the thing that had been following me, driving me crazy for the past week, like it was something normal. Just some guys swapping tips on an unnatural entity that could only manifest in gaps. Obviously, they knew what I'd been dealing with. But I needed them to spell it out for me. I needed to know that I wasn't alone anymore. Because that's what had scared me the most this past week. Not the fact that I could see her, but the fact that I was the only one who could.
Can't say I have, CJ replied. Always just one red, veiny eye, bit of what's left of her nose, and half of that damn smile. And this, more than anything, was proof. The way CJ described her. It wasn't the vague, abstract description of someone who just watched a video or read some notes. It was a description that came from first-hand experience.
My God, so you can see her too, I said. She is real. Oh, she's real, all right. Goatee cut in. A real pain in the paperwork, I can tell you that. Once we realized you were serious about seeing someone on the tracks, we had an idea of what we were dealing with. Went to check the station after it closed for the night, just to be sure. And once you see her, well, you can't really unsee her. She's latched onto you, though. So you're the only one she'll haunt outside the subway.
Goatee said. Wait. So what you're saying is... I trailed off, not really sure how to put it. But CJ got it.
You want proof you're not crazy, don't you? There you go. Certified officers of the law telling you you're not crazy. Very unlucky, yes, but crazy.
He shook his head.
No more than him or I.
The validation washed over me, as sudden and refreshing as a bucket of cold water on a hot day. I slumped down in my chair and exhaled. I had a million things I wanted to say, but I settled for a soft, okay.
You know, you should have seen your face, Goatee began, when I told you we didn't find a body.
CJ chuckled good-naturally and added, probably looked like he'd seen a ghost. You knew, I accused him. This whole time you knew what I saw, but you arrested me anyway.
Nah, come on, we just detained you,
Goatee corrected me.
And look, technically speaking, there really was nothing down there.
CJ clapped a hand on my shoulder.
We have to keep up appearances, you know.
He at least sounded apologetic. But Goatee was not getting off my list anytime soon.
We're already risking a lot with what we do, CJ continued. Tampering with evidence, forgetting to file witness statements, it's a lot. So why we took so long to contact you, son? We wanted to get the charges dropped, but we had to make sure nothing could get traced back to us.
So what are you exactly? I burst out. Are you like two dirty cops? Supernatural special forces? Ghostbusters popped into my head. I bit back a laugh. CJ chuckled.
Supernatural special forces does sound pretty good,
he admitted.
But I'm afraid there's no official name for us, son. And we're not nearly as organized as you probably think. There's only a handful of us scattered around Westington. Probably less in smaller cities.
He then proceeded to tell me one of the most complicated and confusing yarns I've ever heard in my life. I'll be honest, sounded like it was lifted straight from a movie. And if I wasn't so desperate for answers, well, I'd have walked out in 2 seconds. But I didn't. I stayed put and listened to everything they had to tell me. And trust me, they had a lot to tell me. I definitely couldn't keep track of it all, but I managed to focus on the parts that mattered. I learned that the thing in the gap wasn't one of a kind. There were dozens, maybe even hundreds of things like her. Horrific, twisted, malevolent creatures that tried relentlessly to sneak into our world. Why?
I don't know,
CJ said.
Not like we can ask him.
All they knew was that these creatures were terrifyingly persistent. They hid in shadows and slipped through cracks, waiting for their chance to cross over. They did this, CJ told me, by choosing someone to latch onto.
I don't know who figured it out exactly,
CJ said, rubbing his beard thoughtfully.
I guess word just got around. Some fella realized one day that they would haunt only one person. They'd torment them, follow them around, show themselves to them and nobody else, until the victim lost their damn mind.
And then what? I asked. I was afraid to hear the answer, but I had to know. I wouldn't be able to sleep otherwise. CJ sighed.
Well, we don't know. Nobody does. No one alive has seen what happens between the victim losing it and the creature successfully crossing over. It can't be pretty, though. Things as twisted as them can't expect a shred of mercy from them.
So why me? I asked. CJ and Goatee both shrugged in response.
We don't know, son, he began. Our best guess is that you actually interacted with her, talked to her, grabbed her, the whole 9 yards. But we don't know why she showed herself to you in the first place. There's no rhyme or reason to how they operate. If there's a pattern to when they appear and to who, well, we haven't figured it out yet. We just know that they try to sneak into our world every few years or so.
Yeah, someone, don't ask me who, we don't know that either, figured that there must be rules, Goatee began. Rules that not even those freaks can ignore. So maybe there's a god after all, huh? Because something's keeping the monsters on their side of the gate. And the only reason they haven't managed to swarm through and kill all of us is because even they are scared of breaking those rules.
But they certainly don't mind trying,
CJ said. He sounded grim.
So every few years or so, we get an upsurge of dwellers trying to sneak through the gates. And, unfortunately, a few of them get through.
That was the second or third time they mentioned gates. I pointed that out.
That's what we call the spaces they can use to sneak through, CJ said. For lack of a better word, really. So, you're a dweller. Her gate is, as we've established by now, gaps. But other dwellers can use basements or attics. Some dwellers use crash sites or accident sites to cross over.
And always, Goatee cut in.
You would not believe how many dwellers love to use hallways as their gate. The longer the hallway, the better. And abandoned spaces, too, like old cabins and condemned buildings. Those are crowd favorites, too, believe me. Back rooms, shipwrecks, sewers. Oh my God, sewers. You think giant rats are the biggest threats in sewers, you got another thing coming.
The point is, kid, they exist.
CJ cut in.
The creatures on the other side of those gates. Every now and then, something peeks through and looks at our side. Thinks it can make a run for it. It's our job to put those trespassers in their place. It's not an official job. Heck, nobody really knows what we do unless they do it themselves, right? But someone's got to do it.
I looked at him. What was I supposed to say? All I could do was nod as I tried to process every piece of crazy information they told me in the past 30 minutes.
Okay, I eventually managed to say.
CJ, bless his heart, decided to spell things out for me again.
We're telling you this because we can help you, son, he said. And I suddenly felt like I could breathe again. You can? We're gonna help you get rid of her, CJ said. Trust us. We just need a few more days, okay?
But how?
I asked. Well, there's a spell.
Yeah, of course there's a spell,
I muttered.
Goatee shot me a dirty look, but CJ just chuckled.
Sorry, I mumbled. I didn't mean to, it's just not what I was expecting. I know, son, no harm done, CJ said.
I felt a little bad, though. I was seeing frickin' Ghost Girl in doorways. Was I really gonna laugh at the concept of spells?
Look,
CJ pointed at the clock that hung over the office door.
It's getting late, okay?
I looked at the time. We'd been talking for well over 2 hours.
And I suspect you need time to process everything we just told you, he continued.
That was an understatement. I could probably spend the next 24 hours trying to process what I'd been told. Still wouldn't make sense. But maybe a hot shower and 8 hours of solid sleep would help. So I nodded.
So we'll leave it at that,
CJ began.
You go home, all right? You think things over. And if you still want our help, well, you come to the station tomorrow night, around 10. My shift will be over by then, and Goatee here won't start till 1.
Okay, was all I could say. CJ clapped me on the shoulder again.
All right, we can talk more about how to get rid of her tomorrow. Go home, get something to eat, get enough rest. And for God's sake, he said,
with just a hint of mischief,
mind the gaps.
I smiled again for the second time that night. I did what he told me. I went home, showered until the hot water ran out, then helped myself to Natalie's leftovers. She was on her walking pad trying to hit 10,000 steps, so I left her alone. I didn't even know how I would explain everything to her. I barely understood half of it. It was easier just to bid her goodnight, crawl into bed, and beg my brain to shut down and let me sleep. I must have been more tired than I thought, because I dropped off to sleep almost as soon as my head hit the pillow. When I woke up the next day, I spent a few hours staring at the ceiling, letting my thoughts flow unhindered. Good thing it was Saturday. Nat seemed a little worried about me, but not enough to call off her once-a-week date with her friends. I waved her off with a smile. Then I spent the rest of the day on my laptop, researching. I read unsolved cases involving plane crashes, sewers, and abandoned buildings. I tried running searches on terms like gates and dwellers, but got really generic and perfectly normal results. So I started running Google searches for CJ and Goatee. I discovered CJ had been a cop for nearly 3 decades. Before transferring to Westington, he'd been the sheriff of Redding County. But something happened. None of the reports said what that made him resign. He moved to Westington and was offered the position of deputy chief for Westington's South End police force, but he declined and chose to stay as a beat cop. I also discovered Goatee's full name. but I was going to keep calling him Goatee. At 8, I stopped researching. At 9, I headed out of my apartment. I kept my head down, refusing to look at doorways and alleyways. At the subway, I kept my head up, refusing to look at the gap. I took the train a couple stations over, getting off at the platform closest to Westington's South End police station. By the time I walked through the doors, it was 5 minutes to 10. CJ was at the front desk with a bunch of other cops, a styrofoam cup in one hand, and a bunch of folders in the other. One of the other cops noticed me, standing in the station lobby like an idiot. "Can we help you, sir?" he called. CJ turned to look at me, and his face lit up with recognition.
"Jason," he said,
Looking mighty pleased.
"you here to go over your case file again?"
I had no idea if that was the right code. I nodded anyway. "Yeah," I said. CJ beamed. I spent the next 3 nights at the police station with CJ and Goatee. We were mostly talking about how to get rid of the Gap girl, of course. But every now and then, for context or to illustrate a point, CJ would slip in a story about his other dweller cases. And against my better judgment, I found myself enjoying them. Turns out, CJ had been doing this dweller thing since Reading. I figured that since his past records were public, he didn't mind that I knew about that. And I was right. He spoke of Reading fondly. It wasn't as active as Westington was, apparently, but he and his old team had plenty of experiences with dwellers regardless.
"It was the Reading County priest who first told me about him, actually,"
CJ said. This was my 3rd night at the station. Goatee had gone out to take a call. CJ and I were in the old back office, helping ourselves to milkshakes and curly fries.
"Well, poor homeless guy had gone off the deep end,"
CJ continued.
"or so we thought. He was wailing about how his unborn son was following him, popping up in windows and puddles and on the surface of the lake. Reflections, basically. Said his son blamed him for the death of his pregnant wife."
I listened. It was both his saddest and scariest story so far. I gestured for him to go on.
"Well, we were going to have him committed. Seemed like the kindest thing to do, but the priest stopped me. Asked if he could take a look at the case. Must have seen something. You do this job long enough, son, you start to recognize signs of dwellers. So he saw something. And he told me he'd take care of it."
"Brave man," I murmured.
CJ nodded. "One of the bravest I've known. And I've known a lot," he continued. "Must be about 90 now, last I heard. He's still handling Reading's gateways, training his apprentice to take over, probably."
"Is Goatee yours?" I asked. Your apprentice, I mean."
"Goatee?"
CJ laughed.
Nah, he's an okay kid, but he is very stubborn. Goatee's a fine partner, but he would make a lousy apprentice. Anyway, I'd be damned before I let the county priest handle the case alone," CJ continued. "I was the sheriff, after all. I swore to serve and protect. Couldn't stand by and let someone risk their life alone."
"So this was your first banishing, huh?" I guessed. I'd learned most of their terminology by now.
"Yes," CJ confirmed. "Opened my eyes, that priest did. Made me realize the world's a lot bigger and a lot more dangerous than I thought. It made me realize that I missed a lot, too. I failed a lot of people because I wasn't aware of the gates."
"Well, you didn't know," I pointed out. I didn't like that he seemed to be blaming himself. You can only know when someone shows you a gate or a dweller latches onto you, right? I said. CJ shrugged, looking wistful.
"Doesn't matter.
I could have done more, though. The world's bigger than I thought, son. Could have helped a lot more people if I'd realized that sooner.
I opened my mouth to argue, but Goatee came in.
Hey there, fellas. So Miller still has copper shavings and Everlife plants left over from the Hillsborough banishing,
He said, pushing his way into the office. He was holding a box that looked suspiciously damp.
I'll send them over in a bit. Once we add that, we can do Jason's banishing tomorrow or, the day after. We just need to figure out a time,
He said. So soon? I asked. Goatee nodded and set the box down on the table. Man, it smelled too. I moved my fries away from it.
How about it, old man?
Goatee asked CJ, hands on his hips, in what he probably thought was an all-business pose. It made him look 12 years old and, again, ridiculous.
We can do the night after,
CJ said thoughtfully.
It'll be full moon by then. End of a cycle. Symbolic enough to keep this gateway closed a little longer.
Goatee nodded. I was shocked to know that it was all this easy, that it'd be over soon. In a few days, I no longer needed to make sure all doors and windows in my apartment were closed tight. I didn't need to avoid alleys and windows and curtains.
I can do the ritual,
Goatee was saying. Since you just did the one for Santos, give yourself a chance to heal up.
No, CJ began. I can handle. Besides, I've banished her before. It'll be easier the third time.
I glanced between the two of them, trying to follow the conversation. Goatee didn't look happy.
Exactly,
Goatee said, looking equal parts confused and annoyed.
You've cut your soul up enough times this year, okay? You can't risk it.
Cut your soul up? I repeated before I could stop myself. What kind of expression is that? Goatee turned to glare at me.
What are you... It's not an expression. I mean, he literally...
It's part of the banishing spell, son.
CJ cut in. He also didn't look happy. And I had a sinking suspicion it was because he didn't want to explain this part to me.
In fact, it's what the spell does. You do it right. You cut off a piece of your soul, and you give it to the gates.
He said. CJ noticed my horrified expression. He reached out and laid a gentle hand on my shoulder.
It's okay. That strengthens them enough that they recognize there's an intruder, he continued. Then they reinforce themselves to stop the intruder from passing through. It's a defensive spell, and one of the most effective ones we can use. And it's one of the few that's worked so far.
A spell that allowed you to willingly give away your soul, I thought. I didn't get it. I'd done a pretty good job at suspending my disbelief the past few days, but this took the cake.
Yeah, but not literally, right?
I asked.
Yeah, no, we mean literally,
Goatee began.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be arguing with Mr. Self-Sacrificing over here.
It has to be me, Summers, CJ said.
He wasn't even calling him Goatee anymore. This was serious. Goatee made a frustrated noise.
You did the last banishing. We agreed to take turns.
You're the officer who handled his case, CJ pointed out. It's in the records. If he's reminded of the case, he'll need to remember you. But I'm just an old traffic cop. He can forget me easily.
Okay. Time out, I said. I jumped to my feet. I did not like how this conversation was going, and I didn't even understand half of it. Goatee was full on glaring at CJ now. CJ had a stubborn set to his jaw and shoulders. Suddenly, I could see how he'd been Redding County Sheriff. Okay, You want to back up and explain the banishing to me? I asked them both, but my eyes were on CJ. I think I have a right to know. The tense silence stretched out for a couple seconds longer. CJ and Goatee were at a standstill. Finally, CJ gave in. He let loose a long, loud sigh.
Dwellers need us to know they exist, he started. It's why they'll show themselves to the people they haunt. We haven't completely figured it out yet, but we think awareness is important to them. The more people know of their existence, the weaker the gates are. I don't know why it works that way, it just does.
That's why you have to do this in secret, I confirmed. I'd guessed as much early on, but it made sense. This was the kind of outrageous information that could easily spread. Why hide the fact that supernatural monsters existed, unless that was somehow detrimental to our survival? CJ nodded.
Can't exactly tell the higher-ups we need funding to fight monsters from another dimension, he said wryly. No one would believe us unless we showed them proof. And we're not about to extend an open invitation to those things.
So, I get keeping secrets, I began. But what's all this about souls and forgetting?
For the banishing to fully work, I need to give the gates a piece of my soul. And you need to forget about the Gap Dweller, CJ continued, so that less people know about her.
I nodded slowly. That also made sense.
And, that means you need to forget about me and Goatee here, CJ said.
Wait. No, I replied.
We can't change memories, kid, CJ began. We can only remove parts of it. For the banishing to work, we need you to forget all the days you saw the girl in the Gap. So from when you saw her in the subway, up until the day we banish her. And you met us during that time period. So, you need to forget about us, too.
You can't be serious, I shot back. I couldn't explain why exactly, but the thought of forgetting CJ made me want to punch a wall.
That's how it works, kid, CJ added.
Okay, how long have you been doing this? I reminded him. You said you started when you were in Reading. That was 12 years ago? Goatee looked surprised that I knew about Reading. I ignored him. How long have you been giving away pieces of your soul, I continued, to keep people safe? People who can't even thank you because they immediately forget you.
Look, I get you're upset, son, CJ interrupted. But I continued. No, Goatee's gonna do the banishing, I said. You're risking a lot just to help me. If I have to forget you, then you're not giving up a piece of your soul for me. CJ gave me a look. It's mine to give, Jason, he said.
Okay. You've been at this for more than a decade, old man, I began. You can't have much left to give. You know what? Why can't we use my soul? I'm the one she latched onto, right? CJ placed both his hands on my shoulders. His grip was tight.
It doesn't work that way, Jason. And you don't go making decisions for me. I decided long ago, way back in Reading, that I was gonna give my life to stop this. Before he could continue, I interrupted him. And I don't want you risking your life for me just to forget about you. That's shit repayment, I said. Son, if I was told I could do it all over again, I'd still choose this, CJ said. I'll give as much of my soul as I can to keep those gates closed, he continued. And if that means giving my whole soul away, then so be it.
I tried to jerk out of his grip. I wanted to punch him, knock some sense into that old head of his, but I couldn't break free. CJ continued.
And when I have to give away the last bit of my soul, hell, I'll jump through the gates myself. No sense hurting anyone. Letting the people who know me see me become whatever soulless creatures become.
But you don't need to do that, I insisted.
I choose to, he began, for the greater good.
And you don't get to take my choices away from me, son. You understand?
I was stunned. CJ looked me over, as though waiting to see if I had any arguments left. I didn't.
Don't stress about it, kid, CJ said.
The anger I'd seen earlier was gone.
There are dozens of us. Hundreds. People who couldn't save the one person they wanted to. So they save everyone else. Hoping it'll make that one person proud. He finished.
This wasn't an answer. It wasn't even close to the one I wanted. So I didn't say anything. Goatee and CJ continued to talk. When would be the best time to do the banishing? Who they would get as a lookout? Whether Santos from Search and Rescue would be willing to help with the ingredients, that sort of thing. Goatee still looked annoyed, but I guess CJ outranked him enough that he couldn't argue. I tuned him out. When we were done, CJ and Goatee walked me out of the station. CJ had the night patrol this time. He offered to drop me off at my apartment, and I politely declined. I think I'm just going to go for a walk, I said. I need to clear my head. CJ nodded in understanding. He clapped me again on the shoulder.
Chin up, son, he said gently. Just a few more days and you'll be rid of her.
I managed to smile. I don't think it reached my eyes, though. Thanks, CJ, was all I could say. I waited until his cruiser pulled out of the station before I turned to Goatee.
Is any of this real? I asked.
Goatee arched an eyebrow.
Stick your hand in the gap next time you see her, he dared me. You'll get your answer.
He grinned. It made him look even younger. I mean, look, what you and CJ do, I clarified. Finding literal monsters, banishing them.
Damn, man, the last few days have felt like a freaking Ghostbusters episode. This can't be real.
Oh, don't worry, Goatee began.
The stakes here are much higher than Ghostbusters, I'll tell you that.
I let out a noise of frustration.
Look, Jason, I don't know what to tell you. Goatee shrugged. You can see the girl in the gap. You know you're not hallucinating. And you know that if we don't get rid of her for you, she's gonna drive you crazy. We've seen it happen before, I can tell you at least a dozen times. Trust me, it is not pretty.
That brought me up short. Okay, you said you've never seen a successful haunting before, I said carefully.
Were you lying then too?
Goatee winced, as though realizing he'd given himself away. His shoulders sagged the tiniest bit.
Yeah, okay, we sugarcoated it, he admitted. We agreed there was no sense in telling you more than you needed to know. But you know we've been at this for a while. And you know you're not the first person she's used as an anchor, he said.
His voice was a lot quieter as he continued. Like we told you, alright, dwellers try to get out all the time. A lot of them succeed. There's only so much guys like us can do, there's only so many of us. It's why CJ is such a determined, stubborn fool, he said. So he really gives his soul away to reinforce the gates and make people forget? I asked. Goatee simply nodded.
And he's okay with that? I asked. I could feel my frustration rising again. I had no idea why this was upsetting me this much, but it was.
It's the most effective way to get rid of creatures like her,
Goatee reminded me.
You forget they exist. They can't draw on your awareness.
You guys are risking a lot, I began.
He's risking a lot.
For me, for some random guy he just met.
And I'm just supposed to forget what he's done for me.
Goatee looked surprised.
Well, yeah, he said. No one's had a problem with it this far.
Well, I do.
Why? He asked.
I just do, okay? You're supposed to be his partner, man. And you're okay with people, I don't know, using him like this?
Goatee's face hardened, but I wasn't done.
The people he helps get to forget and move on, I began. He's the one who has to live with all this, while giving away bits of his literal soul, by the way. And you just sit there and you let him, huh?
CJ has his reasons.
Goatee shot back.
I may not agree with his methods, but I understand why he does what he does.
I opened my mouth to reply, but Goatee cut me off.
And you know what, for the record, no one lets CJ do anything. You heard him back there. Don't make decisions for him. Everything he does is by his choice. He's come too far and done too much. For somebody like me to cheapen his sacrifices, you understand that.
I paused and looked at him. It's not fair, man.
Are you really gonna make me say life's not fair, Jason?
Goatee deadpanned.
Well, it's not.
The next time I saw CJ and Goatee was at the train station. The same one where I first encountered the girl.
She can't get out of there, right? I asked.
I couldn't help it. I think she knew we were trying to banish her. Her bloodshot eyes were wide and filled with rage. Her lips, usually curled in a manic, demonic grin, were now twisted in a hateful snarl. The sheer force of her, it felt physical, heavy, almost palpable as she glared at us from the darkness of the ticketing booth. CJ and Goatee had decided that a doorway gap would be the best place to banish her. Something about symbolically closing the door to strengthen the gates more. So they chose to set up the ritual around the ticketing booth. It was a small, contained area on the same platform that she haunted, and it had a door that we could open to make a gap where she could manifest. And manifest she did. CJ spoke from somewhere behind me.
I wouldn't let her, he said calmly,
dusting some sort of powder off his hands. Goatee was somewhere to my right, rifle in one hand, and a bag of something that smelled suspiciously like dead fish in the other. There were a couple of other people with us too, guys like CJ and Goatee. They introduced me to Miller, who was apparently the go-to guy for spell components, and Yin, a seasoned gatekeeper who had a killer aim when it came to containing dwellers. Or so CJ told me.
Don't faint on us, Jason, Goatee called. We need you conscious for the whole ritual.
I could see Goatee and Yin cocking their rifles.
I glared at him. Easy for you to say, I said.
You're all the way in the back. I heard Miller and CJ chuckle. Goatee gave me a smug grin. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans and glanced back at the gap. Then I cursed. She was closer now. I didn't even know she could do that. But everything about her, it looked bigger. I couldn't explain it in any way that made physical sense, but it was like she was practically pressing against the gap, straining to get out. I never wondered about her size before this,
But my God, she was huge. Her eye was probably the size of my head now, and her teeth looked like knives.
I took a step back. Hey, whoa, CJ said, placing a calming hand on my lower back. Do not step out of position, son. Everything needs to be very precise for this to work. Goatee snickered at that.
Yeah, we need you to be a little bit braver, Jason,
he said. I was sort of glad Goatee was still being a dick. It was oddly reassuring. Yeah, well, I'm literally facing my own demons over here, I shot back. CJ's startling blue eyes were trained on the monster in the doorway. Was it my imagination, or did it look angrier when it saw CJ? Just like that, Jason, CJ said, his voice comforting and sure. Face her down. Don't let fear paralyze you, kid. He finally took his place behind me. His presence was a solid, comforting weight behind me. I held on to it like an anchor. It wasn't my imagination. She was definitely angrier. And she was getting bigger. Whatever you do, don't let fear stop you from doing what's right, CJ said quietly. And then he began humming. No, that's not the right word. It was like singing. But there weren't any words. It was just music, raw and real, coming deep from his throat. It didn't sound like the kinds of sounds a human could make. But who else could be making it? Goatee and Yin raised their rifles and pointed it at the thing in the gap. She started screeching. It was horrible. It hurt my ears. And more than that, it hurt my soul, I think. The noise she made, God, it was so terrible, that I dropped to my knees and I covered my ears. My whole body began to shake. It was like it was burning me from the inside out. It was like the screeching of 100 souls. My instincts were screaming at me to put as much distance between me and whatever was making that noise. I looked over at Goatee and Yin, and they were even worse. They dropped their rifles and looked to be in some sort of daze. Their eyes were distant and black. I could see blood dripping from their ears. The pain was so horrible, I could barely move. And if it wasn't for one thing, all hope would have been gone right there and then. And I knew she would have killed us all. Or maybe worse. If it wasn't for CJ, I could sense his courage behind me. I could practically feel him humming. It was comforting, reassuring. It made me think of Natalie, of my family, of my friends. I don't know why exactly, but I remembered being a child, no more than 5 or 6, sitting on my grandfather's lap as he smiled down at me. I took a deep breath, took my hands off my ears, and I stood my ground. I wasn't gonna run from this. CJ hummed even louder then, and I heard the others let out a groan, as if some sort of spell had been broken. Goatee got up to his knees, wiped the blood onto his shirt, and aimed his rifle. Yin did the same. They fired their rifles in unison. The loud crack from both sides nearly deafened me. The screeching stopped abruptly. The thing was staring at all of us now, its eye fully red and bulging from the gap. I was breathless and winded. I felt like I'd been yanked between worlds, and I couldn't make sense of what I was feeling anymore. I couldn't move even though I wanted to. Almost there, Jason, CJ said. In the stillness of the station, the aftermath of that horrible noise,
His voice was loud and firm. The thing in the gap heard him. She charged forward, screeching again. "Close your eyes, son," CJ said. And I did exactly that. I wish I could tell you what happened next. I really do. But CJ told me to close my eyes, so I did. And I wasn't about to open them until he told me to do so. All I can tell you is that it went dead silent. I could feel CJ moving behind me. I heard the people around me doing the same. At one point, I heard cursing. I think it was Miller. I heard Goatee and Yin fire again. They weren't as synchronized the second time. Someone fired half a second later than the other. But that's all I knew. I stood there, eyes shut tight, without a clue to what was happening around me. I just knew I trusted the people with me, and the man behind me, with my life. And that was all I needed to know. I stayed still. A full minute passed before I heard someone speak.
"Son of a bitch,"
Goatee said. He sounded pleased.
"You can open your eyes now, son,"
CJ said. I don't know how it happened, but at some point I must have turned around. Or CJ turned me around, because I wasn't facing the ticketing booth anymore. I was facing CJ. I could see Miller over his shoulder, white as a sheet of paper.
"Is it over?" I asked.
CJ looked at me.
"Turn around and look at the gap, kid. Tell me what you see."
I slowly turned and looked. The first thing I saw was a regular wooden office door with a crooked sign on the front. It was slightly open. Through the gap between the door and the frame, I could see the insides of the ticketing booth, a desk, a swivel chair, a computer, and piles of paper. There was no monster in sight. I turned back to CJ and smiled. Goatee looked over at me.
"Every damn time," he said.
Miller spoke next.
"Yeah, he's one of the few with a near-perfect record," he said,
clearly still in pain. CJ chuckled a little. He looked so tired, though, I could see it. There were bags under his eyes. The lines around CJ's mouth looked deeper. His shoulders drooped. There was a slight hunch to his back that hadn't been there hours ago. I reached out to grab his arm and sling it over my shoulder. CJ looked surprised, even as I encouraged him to lean against me.
"You look like you've been through the ringer, old-timer," I said.
His eyes sparkled.
"Ah, heck. This ain't my first rodeo, son."
He paused for a second.
"I'm afraid it's not over yet, though. Gotta make sure Gap Girl stays gone, right?" he said. "You did good, Jason. You put your trust in a couple of beat cops when you didn't have to. And the world's a little safer for it. It'll be a long while before she's back, I'll tell you that."
I didn't do anything, I said. CJ didn't bother arguing. He just lifted his hand, gave me a warm, gentle smile, and said one thing.
"I'm gonna miss you, kid."
Then he pressed his thumb to my forehead, and the world went black. When I came to, the sun was shining overhead. It was so bright I had to squint. The cool air and relative quiet told me it was still pretty early.
People were probably just getting out of bed. I sat up and took in my surroundings, trying to figure out where I was. It looked like a park. Paved walkways, benches, bordered patches of green, and plenty of trees. A dull ache shot through me as I tried to move my legs. I had to bite back a groan. My whole body felt battered and bruised. I took a deep breath and looked around me again. Where the hell was I? How the hell did I get here? And then I heard a voice.
Hey there. You okay?
I looked up. 2 cops stood a few feet away from me. One was an older officer with these bright blue eyes. He looked concerned. The much younger cop next to him looked bored. He had this stupid goatee that did nothing to detract from his baby face. I managed to swing my legs off the bench and onto the ground, but that took a lot of effort. I tried not to groan in pain again, but I don't think I succeeded.
Whoa, easy there, son,
the older officer said. They both walked closer. Where am I managed to croak out. God, my mouth was dry.
You are in the state park,
the younger officer replied.
about a block from Redstone Station.
Okay, I thought. That made a little sense. Station closest to my apartment, I mumbled as I tried to get up. The ache in my legs was going away, but the throbbing in my head was pretty persistent. I gotta go. My girlfriend's probably worried. Was I out all night? I asked.
Yeah, it looks like you had quite the night, didn't you?
The old cop said. He held his hand out to me. I took it.
My name is Officer Connor Rourke, son,
he said, helping me to my feet.
My partner and I found you passed out on this here park bench,
he continued.
You need any help getting back to your apartment?
I didn't say anything. I just stared at the two of them. Finally, Goatee arched an eyebrow at me. The jig was up. I managed a tired but genuine smile. So your name's Connor, huh? I began. So what's the J stand for? CJ froze at that. Next to him, Goatee smiled. I knew it would work, he said. I rolled my eyes. Oh, God, still nauseous. I shouldn't have moved. I looked over at Goatee. Oh, please, dude. You were just as worried as I was before we started the ritual. You didn't know shit, I said.
Yeah, well, at least I don't look like shit,
Goatee shot back. That was a pretty good comeback. Jason? CJ asked. Now, even though I was about as coordinated as a newborn giraffe, I managed to lift my hand enough to clap CJ on the shoulder. I didn't want to forget, I said simply. And for once, I wasn't the one lost and confused. It was a nice change of pace. Now, CJ was much too dignified to keep repeating what like I did, so he just looked at me until I caved. Didn't take much. I asked Goatee if there was a way to alter the ritual. I admitted. Oh my God, my head hurts so bad still. Anyway, I asked if we could banish her without me forgetting her. I didn't want to forget you guys, I said. CJ's brow immediately furrowed, but Goatee spoke first.
I told him that was how some of us did it. How else do we recruit other stupidly brave souls to help us? Heck, it's how we got Santos. Got rid of a backroom dweller that had latched onto his wife.
Goatee finished.
But forgetting is easier, son, CJ argued. He looked worried and more permanent. If you remember her, she could use you again as an anchor. You're not 100% safe now.
The thought had crossed my mind when I was discussing logistics with Goatee. It was a risk I was willing to take, though. Sure, I began. But I also know how to get rid of her. If she tries again, and it'll take her a couple years like you said, right? I'll just shove her back through the gates. Feed him my own soul if I have to. CJ looked shocked. Rightfully so. How long you been doing this, CJ? I began. Years, right? You've been doing this for years? My soul's in a much better state than yours, right? So how about you let me make the sacrifice play every now and then, old man? Why don't we give your soul a little break?
This is serious, Jason, CJ said.
But he didn't look upset anymore. Didn't look too concerned, even. He looked sort of touched.
She's not the only dweller out there, he continued. You'll be like us now, a magnet. They're drawn to people like us because they know we know. You're vulnerable.
All right, don't worry about it, I said. I squeezed his shoulder reassuringly and told him one thing. I'm gonna mind the gap next time. A few months after the banishing, I met Annie. Nat and I were at the hospital for our annual checkup. Natalie, health nut that she is, insists on a full workup every time, and she always needs to have an intense discussion with the attending physician after we get our results. So I sat in the ground floor waiting room, waiting for Nat to finish pestering poor Dr. Martinez, when I noticed a little girl nearby. Tears were coming down the girl's chubby little cheeks as a nurse talked to her. That was Annie, a sweet 7-year-old girl with braided pigtails and a missing front tooth. She carried around a ratty stuffed bunny with big button eyes and lopsided ears. "No, I have to wait for Daddy," she was saying. "If I go up alone, the man in the hallway's gonna get me." "That's just the doctor, Annie," the nurse replied, her voice sweet and gentle. "Come on, your mom knows you're here already. I'm sure she'd love for you to visit." Annie shook her head. "It's not the doctor," she insisted. "I know the doctor. I mean the man in front of Mommy's door. The one with no skin and no eyes." I stared at her. So did the nurse. "Okay," the nurse said. She looked uncomfortable and definitely creeped out. "But your dad went all the way to the pharmacy to buy your mom's medicine. He might be a while. Can you wait 20 or 30 minutes? Annie nodded. The nurse and I exchanged uneasy looks. "All right, sweetie. I need to get back to work though, okay? So just stay here while you wait for your dad, okay?" Annie nodded again. The nurse patted her head and walked off, throwing one worried look in Annie's direction. I waited a bit before introducing myself. "Hey," I said. "Your name's Annie, right?" She nodded shyly. She looked a little wary of me, but not outright scared. I could work with that. "Well, it's nice to meet you. I'm Jason," I said. "Hi, Jason. This is Bunny," she said. She held up her stuffed rabbit to me. "Ah, well, it's nice to meet you, Bunny," I replied. Annie giggled. With enough gentle questioning, I learned that Annie's mom had been admitted for severe food poisoning. She was stable, but very dehydrated. The doctors wanted to keep her in the hospital for a full week just to be on the safe side. I also learned that Annie had seen the No Eyes Man on her first night here. The doctor handling her mom's case was an old family friend, so Annie and her father were allowed to stay past visiting hours. Annie had spent the whole first day with her mom, reading books and watching some TV. Her father arrived a little after midnight to bring her home.
The No Eyes Man wasn't there when we went in the room,
Annie said.
but he was there when we left.
Apparently, she'd taken one look at him and started screaming. It took a whole group of doctors and nurses to calm her down, but that didn't make the No Eyes Man go away. Every time Annie came to visit her mom, she told me tearfully, he was there, waiting just outside her mother's door. Annie told her dad about him, but of course her dad couldn't see him either.
Mommy can't see him either,
she said sadly.
and Daddy said to stop talking about him because Mommy needs to get better.
I didn't know how to respond to that. I just gave her a small, understanding smile, and I gestured for her to continue.
I don't like him,
She said.
he's really big and really crooked, and he doesn't have eyes.
My God, her dweller sounded horrible. The stuff of literal nightmares. I felt anger flare up in me as I took out my phone and sent a quick text message. My mind was made up. I hadn't even seen it yet, but I already hated it for choosing a child to latch onto. She was done with her story apparently, and now was intent on making Bunny tap dance. I gently nudged her shoulder to get her attention. Hey, Annie, do you think you can take me to meet the No Eyes Man?
No, I can't go near him without Daddy. He's scary.
She burst into tears then. I felt horrible for making her cry. I know, Annie, I know, I began. But I need to see the No Eyes Man, because I think I can make him go away.
You can?
She asked. Yeah, but I need to see him first. I need to see where he's staying, so I can make him leave. I'm so sorry to make you do this, sweetie, but I need you to be brave and show me. Do you think you can do that? She thought about it for a minute as my phone chimed with a new message.
Okay.
Annie sniffled. She wiped her face on the hem of her skirt, getting tears and snot all over it. Then she got to her feet and turned to me.
Okay, I'll show you.
I smiled and stood up as well, following her lead. Thanks, Addie. You're so brave for doing this. I'm proud of you. I meant it too. She nodded, suddenly all business, and took my hand. Her mom's room was on the second floor. We took the stairs and headed for the nurse's station. Before we got there, Annie pointed at a hallway to the right.
We have to go here. Mommy's in room 217. I think he lives in the hallway,
she said. Annie took one more step and then stopped completely. She pointed down the hallway.
There. He's right there.
I slowly looked where she was pointing, but I couldn't see anything. No shadows, no stains, no creepy flickering lights. The hallway was completely normal and completely empty.
You can see him, right?
She asked me in a tearful, wobbly voice. I squeezed her little hand in mine and stared again, as hard as I could.
at the spot she pointed out. "I can't, Annie," I said softly. I knelt down and pulled her closer. She whimpered and squeezed her toy bunny harder. "I'm sorry, honey. I can't see what you see. But I know someone who can."